to the Cricketers. Today we'll be talking with Andrew Fernando of Cricket Info about cricket in Sri Lanka and also the first test between England and Sri Lanka. Thanks for joining the Cricketers, Andrew.
Thanks, Adam. Hi, Taz. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming.
Well, mate, the first test that was at Galle, obviously Sri Lanka lost by 8 wickets. Mate, what was your thoughts about the first test?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first day, that first kind of 4 hours of the test, Sri Lanka played about as badly as I've ever seen them or any team play. It was absolutely appalling to see things like, you know, wide long hops being slapped straight to point. I think like a club batsman would be really disappointed to get out that way. And this was Neeraj and Dekwela doing it at the highest level. There were other kind of, you know, reverse sweeps early on in spinners spells without really having a look at what they were doing and how the pitch was responding to them. All of these kind of very basic things that you get taught as like a 12, 13-year-old. The Sri Lanka national team was kind of making a mess of things. I think there are mitigating circumstances. Like they came back from South Africa from very bouncy, fast pitches and straight into a Galle test without much preparation. But still, these are test cricketers who've played in Sri Lanka all their lives, who played many Galle tests before. I think that was really the game. I think Sri Lanka probably competed, were at least on par with England for like the rest of the test. But they just lost so much ground at the top of the match that they just were never able to make it up.
I mean, there were some positives in the test match. Obviously, Sri Lanka's second innings, great fight back to actually get England to a position where they needed to chase. Obviously, in the end, and there just wasn't enough runs on the board and a big enough lead. But Tiramane, his spot in the Sri Lankan side has been under question. I mean, averaging in the low 20s as a test opener. Obviously, from your perspective, it would have been good to see. It was great to see him get 100. And do you think that he's got a future at the top of the order?
I mean, I don't think with Tiramane, I don't think it matters really what I think, because he's played like 70 odd innings, averages even after the 100, which was a fantastic 100, by the way. Really, it was the kind of 100 that you just wished if you're a player who's got this kind of 100 in you, please just do it more often. And why weren't you doing it earlier, and why weren't you doing it more often on in less challenging conditions, score some hundreds, But he's just someone, like, whether or not I think he's got a future, he will have a future. I think selectors and coaches really like him, and there are reasons for liking him. Like, he's very kind of mature and reliable as a person. He's not kind of like a loose cannon type. He's someone that they just like having around. He works really hard in the nets, scores tons and tons of domestic runs, and is just basically just a very likable person. And that's why he's kind of been given. It's almost like the opposite of Fawad Alam, who's also those things but hasn't been given any opportunities. Tiramane has like been in the team despite the fact that he hasn't really done anything, or has failed substantially many times. So it was nice to see him get runs, because now you're hoping, okay, maybe this was the breakthrough performance. Whether he gets runs or not, he's in the team anyway. So the best outcome for Sri Lanka is that he gets runs.
Well, if Karunaratne comes back from injury, then who goes out of the side? Because I know Pereira's opening the batting in the second test. So I mean, What would happen there, you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope that Kusal Perera would move down the order. I think Kusal Perera probably is better utilized at 4 or 5. And Karunaratne comes back in. Kusal Mendis is definitely out of the second test because of his lack of form, and four ducks in a row and a 15. So I think someone like Roshan Silva might step into his position. But yeah, when Karunaratne comes back, I expect the opening combination will be Tiramane and Karunaratne, with Kusal Perera down the order a little bit.
And obviously, it was a bit of a tough time for Kusal Mendis with 4 ducks in a row, as you just mentioned. Do you think there's a way back for him in the test team?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think he's a quality player. I've seen him play, some really high quality innings in various parts of the world. He will always, I think, be that kind of player that has like soaring highs and kind of like haunting lows. He's just that kind of batsman. I've seen him, at age 22 or whatever, play this ridiculous innings against Australia, one of probably Sri Lanka's best innings of the last decade until Kusal Perera played that amazing 153 in Durban. And he's also, he's also done things like in New Zealand, bat an entire day of a Wellington Test alongside Angelo Matthews, which is a really, really hard thing to do against that New Zealand attack. But he's got those kinds of innings in his back catalogue. So I think you can be sure that he's a quality player, just someone who maybe now needs to kind of go back, sort his head out, sort his game out, and come back stronger into the team. That's, I think, the hope with Mendes.
Just looking forward to the second test. I know on the first test, Sri Lanka only went in with the one seamer. Do you think they may be tempted to play another seamer? I know Lucknow didn't play in the first test.
No, I think they'll probably go in with one seamer. Lucknow, I think there's a good chance that he'll be able to come back into the team. So that'll be a big boost for Sri Lanka's attack because he just has the experience. He knows what to do in these conditions. He knows how to hunt for wickets. He'll very much be like that. The Stuart Broad was kind of the perfect seamer in a goal test, and I think Lucknow offers many of the same things that Broad did. I don't see them going for two seamers just because they'll have. I think I heard just today that Angelo Matthews will probably bowl a couple of overs. They've got Dasun Shanaka as a seamer who they underused in the first test. So they've got seam options. And they will really like the idea of having three spinners again. They'll probably go with Ambulenia and Dilrun Pereira. Wanindu Hasaranga, they might kind of think about whether he's the kind of guy to be that third spinner, but I guess they'll make that decision.
I'm going to put you on the spot, mate. What would be your number one Sri Lankan 11 if everybody was fit? I guess it depends on conditions.
Sorry?
I guess it all depends on conditions as well. I'll probably put you on the spot there.
Yeah, it does. So, I mean, I can say for like a goal test, I think Karunaratne and now that Tirumana is kind of scoring runs, you've got to have him up there. I would have Kusal Mendes. An informed Kusal Mendes is a massive asset. Kusal Pereira, Angelo Matthews, Dinesh Chandimal keeping. So Dinesh Chandimal down at number 6, keeping wickets. Angelo Matthews at number 5. And then Dhananjay De Silva at 7. I think he's a massive asset to the team and just a great batsman to watch, and also offers a lot with his spin. And then you could have, if you've got Dhananjay De Silva, you don't necessarily need to play 3 frontline spinners. So that gives you an option of playing either an extra all-rounder or 2 seamers if that's the way you want to go. So maybe if you had Dhananjay De Silva, you still have room for Dasun Shanaka, and then you have 2 spinners, so Dilrun Pereira and Lasith Ambulenia and Suranga Lucknow. So yeah, that would probably be my 11.
Because Kumara's like impressed in his early career bowling, some great pace. What's happened with him at the moment? Is he injured?
He's just coming back from injury, and they weren't happy with kind of the workloads he'd built up enough to give him a test. So he's recovered from his injury, but they would just like him to kind of keep working on his fitness a little bit more after coming back from that injury before throwing him into a test match. There are tests against West Indies that start kind of late next month. That tour hasn't been confirmed, so I think they're probably saving him for that. He's probably the fastest of the Sri Lanka bowlers, but not someone, I guess, like in a situation like a goal surface. Being a fast bowler in Sri Lanka is tough because your margin for error is so small. You have to be kind of on the money all the time, and he's probably not that bowler yet. He's someone who kind of tends to spray it around a little bit more. Has those magic kind of hours of bowling as well when he comes in and looks really threatening, but he's just not quite reliable enough. But he's a young guy. He's got plenty of time to improve.
Andrew, can I ask you if the result in the first test would have surprised anyone in the camp?
I don't know if it was surprising. I mean, last time England were there, they won 3-0. So I don't think you can be like really surprised that England came and they had a good team and they kind of adapted to conditions well. Their batsmen batted well. Root scoring a big double 100 was to the surprise of no one. I mean, he's batted really well in Sri Lanka in the past. So no, all those things considered, probably not. Also, given the fact that they were missing Karunaratne, they were missing Dhananjay De Silva, they were missing Lakmal. Yeah, so it wasn't, you know, Sri Lanka's best team. I know England were also missing Stokes and Archer, but it wasn't. What was really surprising was that first innings collapse. I mean, no one expected them to be quite that bad. But the way they, you know, the eventual results, yeah, probably not so much.
So if it's not surprising, let's talk about why it's not surprising and what the plans to make it a little bit of a surprising result would be.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. So I think it's just the state of Sri Lankan cricket at the moment is that this team is always going to be, right now, is really inconsistent team. It's virtually the same group of players that went to South Africa 2 years ago and won a series there in like ridiculous fashion. And you know, they've also, you know, done okay on tours of West Indies, for example. They're kind of like a middle to lower middle, you know, lower middling team. And there's just a lot up in the air for them. There hasn't been like a lot of consistency around selection. Karunaratne's essentially just kind of come into the job. He'd done it for about a year before COVID hit, and he's kind of now injured as well. So there's a lot of kind of moving parts to this team that make them really unpredictable. So I think when you have a team like that, nothing is a surprise. Sometimes, you know, if they win in fantastic fashion the second test, that wouldn't really be a surprise either, because they have kind of this. I think I've said last year that Sri Lanka is kind of like the new Pakistan, you know.
I was honestly about to draw a parallel as well.
Yeah.
You made the Fawad Alam point, but actually it's a really good point, because when you have teams like what Sri Lanka are experiencing, what Pakistan have experienced for very many years and are probably going through again, you've got a big question, right? So how do we get to that consistency? And Pakistan obviously picked the model of let's try this opening batsman for a couple of tours. No, he's still averaging exactly what he was expected to average. Let's move on and try a different guy. You guys have done a little bit of a mix where you've taken some names in and out, but injury aside, you've tried to keep a core group of players, even persisting with Kushal Mendis despite his last few results and his lack of form generally. That's believing in the player and giving them the ability to have some consistency, or at least some attempt of it. What works and what doesn't work? Because it doesn't seem to be working for Pakistan, the chop and change. It doesn't seem to be working for Sri Lanka. I've talked about this a little bit, and I'd like to know your thoughts on it. I honestly just think at this stage, it is just the structure of Test cricket. And it's just the way that it can work and will work, with the disparity in resources, with the disparity in not just stability in terms of the cricket structures, but also the countries at large. Pakistan and Sri Lanka are very different countries from New Zealand and England for a variety of reasons. Australia, even India, with very formalized cricketing structures. So is it just the way that Test cricket is headed, that the guys with instability or lack of resources are doomed to be lower middling sides?
I think there's a lot. There's a lot of that going around. I think we are getting to a stage where India are imposing themselves and imposing their kind of resources in a way we've never seen them imposed before. And I think there's always kind of been this like 30, 40-year-old kind of theory that if India ever start kind of building towards things the way Australia do, for example, then they're going to be kind of unbeatable. And we saw them win in Australia at the Gabba with essentially, you know, many second string players, because what's underneath that Test team is so solid. The coaching is so professional. The Ranji structure is so good. The people they've got involved, the amount of money they pay, the amount of talent they attract from other parts of the world, all of that is great. I know there is no kind of comparable place where Sri Lanka can get their cricket to, because they just don't have the resources. That said, That said, are Sri Lanka doing the best with the resources that they have right now? Absolutely not. Like, it's not even,
Yeah.
it's almost a ridiculous question to ask because the answer is so obvious. Sri Lanka's domestic structure is appalling. A good kind of a good blueprint for a lot of teams without the resources that the big three teams have is New Zealand. Obviously, I mean, they're the number one test team in the world. They're doing it without the crazy amounts of money that everyone else has. Cricket's only the second biggest sport in New Zealand, so many younger players who can either pick rugby or cricket generally tend to go the rugby direction. So they have kind of a talent drain. They have all of these problems within their system, and yet they found ways to solve these problems and to be the best team in the world. I mean, you had someone like Jamieson come in and make such a huge impact when you've already got Bolt, Southee, Wagner in that bowling attack. I mean, that's a sign of a really good domestic system, and having structures below that just makes sense. And like a high level of competition where the jump from domestic cricket to test cricket isn't so great. Right now in Sri Lanka, you have to learn your game when you get into the test team, like, because domestic cricket is so, is not fit for purpose at all. I mean, I could go into the problems of domestic cricket, but that's like a whole other podcast. But suffice to say, it's just like, it's basically way too many teams, and good players aren't tested at that level, and they get into the test team and they're very undercooked.
I don't mean this to sound disparaging, but I think it's going to come out that way. And it's probably going to disparage everybody that I talk about, but I have Sri Lankan ethnicity associate nation friends who go to Sri Lankan domestic cricket and, I don't know, walk away with an average of 130. And they're talented batsmen. They are. I don't know if they're 130 average talented batsmen. But and it's the same thing for Pakistan, just because we've seen before the Fawad Alam situation, there were years and years where Haris Sohail was averaging like in the 90s, and then it dropped a little bit, but massive averages, things that aren't translating to the test structure. And I think that strength of that domestic cricket and how much that leap is from that stage up is a massive aspect of it. So I know you said that the domestic cricket conversation is incredibly long, but briefly, what are some of the overlying issues? Is it money? Is it pitches? Is it talent resources?
The number one problem is there are too many first-class teams, right? So Sri Lanka is a country of 20 million, of which only kind of 7 or 8 kind of major urban centers are kind of really plugged into the cricket. And even 7 or 8 is probably overstating it. Basically, you've got kind of one swathe of the country that you're picking at your talent pool out of. So really, it's not, you say 20 million, but it's much less than that, the number that comes into play for playing cricket. And you're also like, very much a developing nation, I think, between the lower and upper income, kind of middle income countries. And also, so you've got 14 first-class teams and a second tier of first-class cricket. So it's kind of like the English system in that way, that has 9 further teams. So you've got 23 or 24 teams all picking up first-class players. That's every week during the season, you're playing, 260 players are on the field. So that is a crazy amount of like dilution of talent. New Zealand by comparison have 5 teams?
6 teams.
Six teams. So that's, I think, the biggest issue is that you can't have, if you're a solid batsman, if you're, say, a good batsman, you've come through the school system, the school system is pretty solid in Sri Lanka still. And you got to age 18, 19, you go into a club match, you're facing an attack, there might be one good bowler in the opposition, there might be 2 good bowlers, but you just learn to play them out, to not score runs off them, and then just like smash the rest to a much lower quality. That doesn't teach you anything, because at test level, you can't just block out certain bowlers and not score off them, because everyone else is good as well. And so you have to figure out how to score against good bowling. That's like a very, very basic kind of skill that you have to have. when you get to the test level, and those kinds of things aren't happening. And you can replicate that with, you know, spinners who get these like absolute dust bowls to run through oppositions and never get tested. You can be really talented, you can have like a really high ceiling as a player, but you're never going to get there and be consistent until you're like tested time and again. So a good batting order comes up and you have to figure out how to get them out. All those things, fast bowlers, same thing. So that's really the big issue. Also, Sri Lanka's domestic cricket is Colombo centric. So if you want to play domestic cricket in the country, you have to move to Colombo. And lots of promising players don't really have the resources to do that. You could be in another part of the country and be a really good player and have a big future. But unless, you know, you find a benefactor to help you out, or a club kind of goes out of their way to pick you up, you're missing out on all those players that might kind of have kind of a growth spurt or like a talent spurt in kind of their early 20s, because by that time, all the players who can, you know, all the players who might have that kind of future have been weeded out by the system. So yeah, that's just like very quickly going through a few of the issues.
So that actually brings me on to another question. With your domestic cricket structure, what's the interest in both players and fans in engaging in domestic cricket? And does that have an effect on test cricket, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's very lopsided. So there's virtually no interest in domestic cricket apart from like diehard cricket fans. You go to a domestic match, you know, the joke about county is that, you know, there's an old man and his dog. Like there's a bunch of stray dogs because you have them at every match.
Sounds like New Zealand.
Yeah. But there's no old man even. It's just the players. I mean, the players take it seriously. Obviously, it's like part of their livelihood. They're not paid enough for it, I don't think. And again, that goes back to having too many first-class teams. If you had fewer, you can pay your good players more to keep playing and to keep training. And how? I mean, but then at the top level, I mean, Sri Lanka's cricket is by far the most popular sport in the country. There's kind of cricket, daylight, and then I don't even know what the second, maybe at track and field, maybe rugby. At domestic level, though, it's not supported. It's not really followed unless you have something like the LPL.
Yes. Good. How was the LPL?
Yeah, it was surprisingly good. I think I wasn't expecting much because it's a tournament that had been kind of announced and cancelled for several years. SLC did a really good thing in terms of getting this IPG group who kind of essentially organized the tournament for them to together, and they helped, I think, ease out all of the kind of logistical things especially in a pandemic year, to make the tournament happen. And then once it started happening, it was really fun. I really enjoyed it. We had this great story from, the Jaffna Stallions kind of franchise who were from this northern hub in Sri Lanka, which it comes with kind of a lot of political and kind of a lot of political baggage, I would say. The city of Jaffna it has a lot of history, and obviously we've come out of a 30-year civil war that ended in 2009. And Jaffna very much was kind of in the center of that. So that comes with all sorts of kind of unusual things. But yeah, by and large, the fact that they went on to win was fantastic as well, and we got to see this young Jaffna player play. It felt good, and I think there was a lot of benefits, both cricketing and otherwise, for Sri Lanka cricket from it.
So obviously in a COVID year, you can't really gauge fan engagement in the same way you'd be able to in other circumstances. But was it talked about? Was it engaged with? Do you think it's going to make a difference with the national side's engagement? Yeah,
I think it definitely was engaged with. It was the biggest thing in Sri Lanka for the 3 weeks or the 4 weeks that it was going. Definitely, people were tuning in every game. There was a lot of social media stuff about it. Lots of people on Twitter, on Facebook, Instagram, wherever. It was a hit, as like a commercial hit as a tournament, certainly in Sri Lanka. And I think we saw, a few players being unearthed, including by the Galle Gladiators franchise, who are the same owners as the Quetta Gladiators. I think it really did capture like the nation for a few weeks.
Do you think it's going to make a difference or a positive impact on the cricket, at least? Because for Pakistan, that concept of you know, putting on your own league and unearthing players that you may not have found otherwise, or may have gone through the cracks of the systems, that definitely, or the intention was to have a positive impact on the cricket. And to some extent, I think it has. What do you think the effect in Sri Lanka will be?
I think that's very comparable to where the PSL started as well. And I think it will be, I mean, without kind of being like the LPL will solve everything, it absolutely won't. There's much bigger problems that require something much greater and kind of more political will than the LPL to solve. But it will be, I think it'll be, especially on white ball cricket, it'll be, you know, there are players like this Dhananjay Lakshan, who's kind of this 22-year-old seam bowling all-rounder, who no one had really heard of before. Dude comes in, bowls like a bunch of back of the hand slower balls with like no issues, really accurate, bats reasonably well also, and just seems like a player, like, let's get this player into an academy, let's get him into like, you know, some Sri Lanka squads or the Sri Lanka A squads more often. So you did get kind of a few gems like that. Manindu Hasaranga, I think, probably wouldn't be playing the tests right now if he didn't have such, he was virtually unplayable in the LPL, just absolutely no one could play him. So that kind of saw him. In fact, Mickey Arthur, who oversaw kind of the rise of Shadab Khan, has come out and publicly said Wanindu's kind of like our Shadab in this team. So yeah, I think you will get some of those stories, like some of those Shadab Khan kind of Fahim Ashraf type stories from the LPL as well. I think that they've confirmed the second season for July or August this year. So let's hope that they can build on what they started in November.
And let's hope that that's not where the red ball aspirations lie.
If you're looking to your T20 tournament to provide your red ball, kind of the bulk of your red ball team, it seems like a recipe for disaster. And I think there are probably lots of people who are smart enough in Sri Lankan cricket who know that, but it's just where the SLC, who seem very, very pleased with themselves, by the way, that the LPL was such a hit, who are incredibly
PSL,
whether it's just like, can they rein in their egos enough to realize, look, the world is bigger than the LPL.
On that positive note, I just want to say thank you for joining us. I know you've got a lot to cover for the second test. Predictions before you go?
Don't know about predictions because the Sri Lanka team is so unpredictable, and England is to an extent as well. I think they'll play better. I think we'll get a closer result in the second match. I don't think they're going to be wiped out in a session the way that they were in the first test. So that's about as strong a prediction as I'm willing to commit to.
I think that's positive. Definitely positive. Thank you, Andrew, so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for being here. Bye.
Thanks, Andrew.
Take it easy. All right.